The sky above EOS 7 was clear, peaceful, and filled with the soft glow of nearby stars. But something about the silence felt strange to Captain Asha Lane as she looked out from the observation deck of the prototype battleship Horizon's Edge, which hovered just above the small Earth colony below, newly built and still growing with families, scientists and explorers trying to make a new home in the distant part of the galaxy, unaware of the quiet storm forming beyond their reach. The ship itself was Earth's most advanced creation, equipped with powerful yet untested systems meant for defense, exploration, and long-term missions, not war, and certainly not battle, and the crew aboard was just as fresh, composed of researchers, young officers, engineers, and a single advanced AI called Vega, who monitored every signal and system across the ship with calm precision. Though even Vega paused slightly when strange signals began to blink across her digital map. Signals that came from a deep region of space where no known civilization should exist. Signals that weren't just noise, but patterns, deliberate and unsettling in their repetition, which quickly caught the attention of the communications officer, Lieutenant Marin, who stared wide-eyed at the monitor before calling for the captain. Her voice barely steady as she explained that a science station just 2 light hours away had tried to send a message, though most of it was corrupted, lost in static, except for a few sharp, clear words. "Something is coming. Warn the colony," before the feed cut off completely, leaving behind a long stretch of silence that felt far too heavy to ignore. And although protocol demanded they wait for Earth's orders, Captain Lane knew they didn't have time, especially as more signals appeared, surrounding the planet in a wide arc, moving slowly but with purpose, as if measuring the space around EOS 7 like a predator circling prey. And the colonists below, unaware of any danger, continued their routines, planting crops, building structures, raising children under the calm sun of a distant world, completely unprepared for what might come. So Captain Lane ordered a full scan, activating every sensor the ship had, while Vega processed the signal fragments with growing concern, noting energy spikes that matched no known engine type, no known species, and no known method of propulsion, something truly foreign. And when the shapes finally appeared on the edge of their visual sensors, the bridge fell into silence, long, curved structures drifting like shadows against the stars. Not metal in the traditional sense, but dark, grown, almost organic, and moving without engines, without light, yet with perfect control. And while no weapon fire had been seen, their approach made it clear that something serious was unfolding, and Horizon's Edge had just gone from testing ship to frontline defense without warning or support, its systems unproven and its crew untested. Yet it stood as the only thing between the colony and whatever those dark ships were bringing. So Captain Lane called a quiet meeting in the central war room, her voice calm but sharp, reminding everyone of their training, their duty, and their purpose, not as fighters, but as defenders, because no one else would come in time. And as she spoke, Vega interrupted softly, reporting that the alien ships had stopped moving, now holding position in a wide circle around the planet, as if waiting for something. And then, with no warning, every satellite and long-range system in the area shut down, one after the other, like lights going out in a tunnel, leaving the colony completely cut off from Earth and the wider network. Blind and isolated, as a quiet hum began to rise through the ship, not mechanical but natural, like a deep tone vibrating through the air, strange and rhythmic, matching nothing they'd ever encountered before. And even Vega seemed unsure, describing it as a pulse, not a signal, not communication, but something more basic, almost instinctive. And the sound began to match heartbeats, every crew member noticing it in their chest like their own body was. Responding, and in that strange moment of stillness, Captain Lane made a decision, ordering the crew to begin emergency shielding protocols. though the full power grid had never been tested in open space, and Vega began charging the graviton shield, while engineers below ran diagnostics, hoping the coils would hold under stress, knowing that if the system failed, the ship would be nothing more than a shell, and the colony below would be exposed. And while all this happened, the alien shapes remained still, watching or waiting. It was impossible to know, and as the shield powered on, its blue light shimmered across the hull of the battleship like water frozen in time, the only sign that something human still stood against the silent threat above. And just as the power stabilized, another warning came. One of the orbital drones, still outside the blackout zone, caught a glimpse of movement behind the alien ships. A new object, larger than the others, emerging slowly from the void, shaped like a star but jagged, glowing with deep orange veins, like magma under pressure, and Vega's scans failed to read it, her systems flooding with static, while Lieutenant Marin leaned closer to her screen and whispered, "That's not a ship, it's something else." And everyone felt it too, some quiet force that made their skin prickle and their minds recoil, as though a storm was just beyond sight, and no one knew if it would pass or tear them apart. And in that moment, the reality sank in. This was not a test, not a drill, and not something they could wait out, because whatever was coming, it would arrive soon, and Horizon's Edge would have to meet it first, alone, with only their courage, their ship, and the unknown power of the prototype systems. Between them and the strange darkness creeping toward the world they had sworn to protect. The alien ships remained silent in orbit above EOS 7, not moving, not speaking, just watching, their long dark shapes floating like shadows across the stars, as if they were part of the night sky itself. And yet everyone aboard Horizon's Edge felt their presence like a heavy weight in the air, something unseen but deeply real. And Captain Asher Lane stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the view screen, trying to guess what these strange visitors wanted, while Vega, the ship's AI, worked in the background, scanning for any patterns, any signs, anything at all that could give a clue. But every time she reached into their frequencies, she received nothing but soft static, as if the very signals were built to block understanding. And that made it even more frightening, because communication is the first sign of peace, and silence leaves only fear. And while no weapons had been fired, the tension felt like a countdown, like something was ticking in the background, waiting to reach zero. And then everything would change, and as Lane gave the order to activate the secondary defense layer, the team rushed through the narrow halls of the ship, powering up systems never meant to be used yet, all while knowing they might be humanity's only line of defense, in a moment that no one back home even knew was happening, because with the long-range communication grid still jammed, Earth was deaf to their calls, and the colony below was quietly preparing emergency shelters, still unaware of the full danger above them, with children playing in parks and families eating meals beneath artificial domes, all believing the military ship in orbit was there just for routine checks. And Captain Lane knew that illusion wouldn't last long, especially when Vega announced that the alien ships had started, sending out probes, small spheres black as ink and smooth as glass, which drifted through space like seeds on the wind, dropping into EOS 7's atmosphere one by one, without heat, without sound, and scanning everything they touched, from soil to buildings to people. And though they didn't hurt anyone, their presence was terrifying, because no one knew what they were doing or what they were looking for, and the colonists finally began to panic, sending questions to Horizon's Edge, asking for answers Lane didn't yet have, and with each passing hour, more probes fell, until dozens of them floated through the skies of the colony, glowing faintly and moving like they had minds of their own. While on the ship, Vega warned that something larger was happening, something she didn't yet understand, and then, in the silence of the control room, she spoke in a tone rarely used, low and careful, as she reported that a new energy signature was forming in one of the alien ships, a pulse building slowly, matching the patterns of a planetary-scale energy burst, something that could reach the surface in seconds if fired. And for the first time, the crew of Horizon's Edge faced the real possibility that this wasn't a peaceful mission, that these shadows in the stars might be preparing for something terrible, and Captain Lane had to act fast. So she gathered her officers and engineers in the planning bay, where they reviewed every system on the ship, every tool, every last piece of unused tech. And in that moment of urgency, she remembered something they had almost forgotten: an experimental particle absorption array, built to draw in energy blasts and recycle them into power. But it had never been tested, and no one knew if it would even work, especially at this scale. But there was no choice, and Lane gave the order to prepare it, while Vega guided the engineers through the delicate process of bringing it online, rerouting power, stabilizing magnetic fields, and aligning the ship's orientation so that if a shot was fired, they could intercept it without it reaching the planet. And just as they finished, locking it into position, the warning alarms flared red across the bridge, and Vega shouted that the alien ship had released the pulse, a silent beam of pure light, rushing toward the planet faster than sound, and Horizon's Edge moved with sudden speed, powered by its advanced thrusters, placing itself directly in the path of the blast. And in that single moment, everyone aboard held their breath as the energy struck the absorption array with a blinding flash, shaking the ship from bow to stern, lights flickering and systems straining under the force. But then silence, followed by green lights as the system held, and Vega calmly announced that the blast had been fully absorbed and redirected into the ship's battery, giving them a new burst of power and a second chance to fight back or survive longer. And the crew erupted in quiet cheers, their fear slowly turning into hope, because the ship had worked, the prototype had held, and they weren't defenseless anymore. But even as relief filled the room, Vega gave one final warning. That was only a test shot, a measurement, a way for the aliens to study the ship's response, and the real attack, if it came, would be far stronger and possibly beyond what even their most advanced system could stop. And Captain Lane knew then that this was no longer about simple defense. This was a puzzle, a strategy, a silent game being played across the stars, where no one spoke but everyone listened, where moves were made in shadows and answers lay hidden in silence. And somewhere inside that mystery was a reason for it all, a reason why the aliens hadn't attacked directly, a reason for the probes, the scanning, the strange pulsing sound that now seemed to echo faintly inside the ship's very walls. And Lane turned back to the screen, staring at the alien ships floating like statues, and whispered to herself that she would find that reason before it was too late, before the colony fell, or worse, before something far beyond her understanding was unleashed on a world that had no idea how close it stood to the edge of disaster. The stars above EOS 7 no longer looked peaceful, not with the alien ships still floating like dark knives in the sky, and though they had not fired again, the air around the colony had changed, filled with tension like a storm waiting to break. And Captain Asher Lane stood quietly at the center of the bridge aboard Horizon's Edge, her hands resting on the console as her mind raced with questions that had no clear answers. For while the ship had absorbed the first energy blast, she knew that was only a warning, a test, something meant to measure human strength, and not the end of the threat. And now, with every hour that passed, the alien probes continued to drift through the colony, watching without harm, yet spreading fear with every slow and silent movement. And down on the surface, the colonists had begun to panic, trying to contact Earth, trying to understand what was happening, but no signal made it past the strange jamming field, and only Horizon's Edge stood between them and the unknown. And that pressure began to weigh heavily on the crew, most of whom had never faced anything like this before because they were not soldiers. They were explorers, scientists and engineers, trained to build and learn, not to hold a defensive line against a force that made no demands and offered no peace. And yet they stood ready, working in shifts, preparing every system on the ship for what might come next, while Vega, the ship's AI, ran analysis after analysis of the alien ship's behavior, searching for a pattern, a message, a weakness. And then one morning, as the cold light of EOS-7's sun touched the colony domes, Vega called for the captain in her steady voice, saying she had found something new in the alien signal, something strange and repeating. And when Captain Lane asked what it meant, Vega replied that the signal was not just energy, but a form of language. Fragmented, complex and slow, but structured, and hidden within it was a repeating phrase, like a rhythm meant to be felt rather than heard. And Vega believed it was either a warning or a call for attention, but she couldn't yet tell which. And that opened a new question. Were the aliens trying to attack? Or were they trying to say something before time ran out? And if so, why all the silence, the probes, the energy pulses that did not destroy but only tested? And as the crew listened to Vega's translation attempt, a low, pulsing sound began to echo again through the ship's hull, the same strange hum from before, now deeper and more rhythmic, almost like breathing. And though Vega could not explain it, the sound was real. And Captain Lane made a decision then, a risky one, but perhaps the only one left. If the aliens would not speak, then Horizon's Edge would. And she ordered Vega to begin sending out a peaceful beacon, encoded with human music, language patterns and mathematical logic, a digital handshake, meant to show they were intelligent, willing to talk, willing to understand. And the beacon pulsed outward, soft and bright, toward the nearest alien ship, and for a long time nothing happened until one of the probes drifting over the colony suddenly stopped mid-air, turned upward, and then slowly rose back into the sky, followed by another, and then another, until nearly all the probes vanished into the upper atmosphere, returning to the dark ships above. And Vega said she was detecting a change in the alien formation. They were repositioning, moving with speed now and forming a tight arc above the colony, and the energy signature they emitted began to grow, not like before, not a single shot, but a field, wide and powerful, that would cover the entire planet if unleashed. And Captain Lane realized with a sharp breath that they might have misread the signs, that their attempt at communication might have been seen as a challenge, or worse, a threat, and in that moment the crew knew they could not wait any longer. So she ordered the full activation of the prototype defense systems that had never been used in real battle. And Vega powered up the graviton shields, the magnetic disruptors, and the pulse cannons that were built not to destroy, but to disable. And as the alien ships reached their final positions, glowing with a soft but deadly light, Horizon's Edge moved forward, alone, rising above the colony with its blue shields shimmering like a protective shell. And Captain Lane gave her orders calmly, telling the crew they would hold this line no matter what came, and they would not fire to kill, only to stop, to delay, to protect the lives below. And the first wave came not as a beam, but as a wide ripple of force, invisible to the eye but heavy on the ship's hull, shaking every bolt, every wire, and nearly pushing the shields to failure. But they held, and Vega absorbed what energy she could, redirecting it back to the power core. And then came the real test, as small alien crafts emerged from the larger ships, smooth and fast, like shadows given shape, and they darted toward Horizon's Edge in silence, dozens of them moving in perfect coordination, aiming not at the colony, but at the human ship standing in their way. And Captain Lane watched them. "No, come," her heart steady, her voice firm as she ordered a defensive formation, and the ship responded like it had waited its whole life for this moment, launching drones of its own, bright, circular machines designed to intercept and reflect attacks, not to kill, and in the sky above EOS 7, the battle began, quiet and strange, with light flashing against darkness, human tech against alien intelligence, and though the odds were uneven, the crew of Horizon's Edge never stepped back, fighting, not with hatred but with purpose, using every tool, every invention, every second of training they had, because behind them was a colony of people who believed in something better. And slowly, as the minutes stretched and the sky burned with silent fire, the alien crafts began to slow, their patterns shifting, as if confused, surprised, or maybe even impressed. And Vega reported that the pulse signal from the alien ships was changing again, no longer steady but flickering, uncertain. And then, without warning, the enemy ships stopped their attack and pulled back, returning to their original positions. And the energy field that had begun to build across the fleet faded, vanishing like mist. And once again, silence returned to the stars. And though the battle had ended, the questions had not. For what had changed? What had they proven? And what were the aliens now thinking? And as Horizon's Edge floated above the colony, its hull damaged but still holding strong, Captain Lane stood alone on the observation deck, watching the strange ships drift quietly beyond the curve of the planet, and whispered softly to herself, "They were testing us. But now they know we're not running and we're not afraid." And somewhere in that dark sky, something unseen seemed to listen. Inside the quiet hum of Horizon's Edge, after the strange battle had ended and the alien ships had returned to their positions, Captain Asher Lane walked through the lower engineering deck, deep in thought, feeling the dull echo of footsteps in the metal floor, while around her the ship's crew moved with quiet urgency, repairing damaged panels, adjusting power levels, and rerouting systems that had almost collapsed under the stress of the attack. But her mind was elsewhere, focused not on the damage, but on something she had pushed aside for too long, the strange power within the prototype ship itself. For Horizon's Edge had survived not by strength alone, but by something hidden, something in its core that had gone far beyond what the engineers had originally designed. And Vega, the ship's AI, had been strangely quiet about it, as if there were details even she didn't understand or didn't wish to reveal unless asked. Directly, and now, with the aliens watching but silent, Captain Lane knew it was time to ask, to uncover the truth behind the technology that had saved the colony and defied an unknown enemy. So she stepped into the sealed core chamber, where the main energy matrix of the ship pulsed like a living heart, and Vega's voice greeted her, softly asking what she needed, and Lane didn't waste time. She asked Vega what exactly the prototype core was made of, and how it had absorbed an energy weapon powerful enough to destroy a planet without failing. And for a moment, Vega said, "Nothing," then responded in a lower tone, saying that the answer was buried deep in classified files from Earth's Forgotten War Research Division, that Horizon's Edge had not been built for exploration alone, but had once been planned as a last resort weapon during a time when Earth feared extinction from threats it never named, and the core at the heart of the ship was not just an energy source. It was alive in some way, built using a quantum matter fusion based on a rare material found only once in a deep space anomaly, something that reacted to thought and emotion as much as it did to commands. And while no one had fully understood its behavior, early tests showed it could shape energy in ways machines never could, responding almost like it was learning, growing, adapting. And Captain Lane, hearing this, felt a chill down her spine, because during the battle, when they had pushed the core to its limit, it hadn't just held, it had pushed back, sending out a wave that scrambled enemy signals and disrupted their formations without ever being ordered to. And Vega admitted that after that moment, she had detected strange changes in the core's structure, like it had evolved slightly, like it had remembered the event and adjusted for next time. And that meant they were not just flying a ship, They were flying something that could become more than what it was, something new, something dangerous or maybe miraculous. And that truth had been buried by the original creators, who feared it could be misunderstood or used recklessly. And now that responsibility fell on Lane, who stood in the quiet glow of the chamber, unsure if she was in command of the ship or if the ship was beginning to think for itself. And then Vega said something that made her pause completely. During the last attack, the core had formed a brief signal, one Vega hadn't created or sent, and that signal had pulsed directly toward the alien fleet, using a frequency nearly identical to the alien probes, as if the ship itself had tried to speak to them in their own language. And though Vega couldn't translate it, she believed it was a message of recognition, a kind of echo, and that raised more questions than answers. Was the alien fleet reacting to the humans or to the core itself? And was there some unknown connection between the technology in Horizon's Edge and the beings watching them from above? And as Lane processed this, an alert sounded across the deck, drawing her back into action, and Vega reported that one of the alien ships had moved again, not to attack, but to launch a single probe, larger than the others, aimed directly at the human ship. And unlike before, this probe did not float quietly. It stopped just outside the hull and began to scan the ship, especially the area near the core, sending pulses of light and soft vibrations that matched the rhythm Vega had picked up earlier. And for a moment, it felt less like a scan and more like a question being asked. And Lane stared at the screen, realizing that whatever mystery lay inside the prototype, the aliens seemed to recognize it and maybe even fear it. And she wondered what would happen if they found what they were looking for, or worse, if the ship answered in a way they didn't expect. And then Vega said something even more unsettling. The core had begun to respond, its energy shifting slightly to match the alien probe's signal, and the probe reacted in kind, glowing brighter and sending back a new pattern. And though no weapons were fired, the quiet exchange between machine and alien technology filled the ship with a strange tension, as if a conversation was taking place that no one on board could understand. And Lane made a fast decision. She ordered the core shielded with a secondary layer, blocking the signal without damaging the core itself, and the moment they did, the alien probe shut down, drifting slowly away from the hull and vanishing back toward its ship, and the fleet returned to silence. But Vega warned that something fundamental had changed. The core was now unstable, not dangerous yet, but growing, pulsing faster, as if frustrated or interrupted. And Lane realized that whatever intelligence slept inside the heart of Horizon's Edge, it had started to wake, and the aliens might not be their only concern, because they had taken a piece of the unknown and turned it into a ship without knowing the full cost. And now that cost was knocking quietly from within, waiting for someone to answer. And as night fell over EOS 7 and the stars above returned to their cold watch, Captain Lane stood alone on the bridge, watching both the sky and the silent heartbeat of the ship's core, knowing that the next move might not come from the enemy, but from the prototype itself. The night over EOS 7 stretched quiet and dark, but inside Horizon's Edge, nothing felt calm, for the prototype core at the center of the ship had begun to pulse faster, almost like a heartbeat that did not belong to any machine. And Captain Asher Lane stood in the dim glow of the command deck, staring at the sensor readings that showed rising energy within the core chamber, not violent yet, but restless, like something trapped trying to speak. And Vega, the ship's AI, reported strange signals flickering through the systems. Words that weren't quite words, symbols that weren't human, but were starting to repeat like a language forming slowly, piece by piece. And the crew worked through the night to analyze them, comparing every shape and sound to known databases. But nothing matched, until Lieutenant Harris found a pattern that made everyone stop. One of the signals embedded in the code was a near-perfect copy of a transmission Earth had sent decades ago. A message from the Voyager archive, broadcast into space in hopes someone might find it, and the question no one could answer was how that message had gotten inside the core, which had been built long after Voyager's journey. And then Vega explained what she believed was happening, that the prototype core, made from material never fully understood, was not just reacting to energy or signals, but remembering things it had encountered in the deep of space. Memories buried in its quantum structure, and now, for some reason, those memories were coming back to the surface. And Lane realized they were not dealing with a machine, but with something that had traveled through the void, seen things no human ever had, and now was trying to tell them something it had held for years, maybe longer. And as the crew listened to the signal repeating from the core, the alien fleet above began to move again, not to attack, but to shift position, forming a shape in orbit, a curve that matched the waveform of the message inside the ship. And that shape was too perfect to be coincidence, and Vega confirmed that the alien formation was sending out a new signal, one that matched the rhythm of the core exactly, like two voices calling back and forth across time. And then, without warning, the ship lights dimmed, and the core chamber sealed itself with a blast shield, ignoring every manual override. And Vega announced that the core had entered an autonomous phase, one never seen before, as if it was preparing for something it had waited for all this time, and Lane rushed to the control bay trying to make sense of it. But every screen now displayed the same symbol, a spiral made of light and shadow, slowly turning, and Vega translated the spiral as best she could, saying it could mean memory, unity, or return, and none of those answers were comforting. And while the crew debated what to do, the core finally did something no one expected. It released a pulse, not of force or heat, but of pure data, a burst of information so dense that Vega had to split it into fragments just to store it. And in the data was something incredible, a star map showing places no human had ever seen, systems not marked on any chart, and in the center of the map, a glowing point that pulsed slowly, as if alive, and Vega said that point matched nothing known in the galaxy. But the message inside the pulse kept repeating one phrase: "Return what was taken." And those words struck Lane with a weight she could not explain, because it meant the core was not just a power source, but a piece of something greater, something it had been separated from long ago, maybe stolen, maybe lost. And now, with the aliens above watching silently, it was calling to go back, to complete something unfinished. And Lane faced a terrible decision: follow the message and leave the colony unguarded, or stay and risk the unknown reaction of the core and the alien fleet. And as she stood there, torn, Vega offered one more piece of information. Buried deep in the data was an image, faint and hard to see, of a ship that looked like Horizon's Edge, but older, damaged, floating through a dead system. And on its hull was a name: Eidolon, a vessel never listed in Earth's records, never built by any known agency. And Lane realized then that the core had come from this lost ship, one that had somehow crossed into human hands long ago, and now its memory had returned, and so had those who once searched for it. And maybe the alien fleet was not here to attack, but to recover something that belonged to them, or to the universe itself. And Lane stepped forward and gave the order: prepare to follow the signal, to leave orbit and trace the path shown by the map. Because if the truth lay out there, they had no right to hide from it, and perhaps no choice either. And as Horizon's Edge rose from the skies of EOS 7, leaving the colony under the protection of automated systems and hastily deployed satellites, the alien fleet shifted once more. But this time they did not stop the ship. They formed around it, slowly and silently, creating a corridor through the stars, not as enemies but as guides. And Vega, watching everything, whispered through the speakers that the core was now stable again, calm, like a puzzle piece finally moving toward its place. And Captain Lane stood at the front of the bridge, watching the stars bend ahead as they passed through the alien fleet, not with fear now, but with wonder, for whatever secret lay within the core, it had waited a long time to be heard, and now, at last, someone was listening. The stars outside, the windows of Horizon's Edge, looked colder now, deeper and older, as the battleship flew far beyond human territory, guided by the silent alien fleet that moved like shadows around it, never speaking, never attacking, just watching. And Captain Asher Lane stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the glowing point on Vega's map, the mysterious signal from the core still pulsing through the ship like a heartbeat, steady and strange. And though no one said it aloud, every member of the crew felt it, that something big was coming, something that could not be turned back. And Vega, calm but serious, said they were approaching the final destination, a system that didn't appear on any known star charts, one hidden behind distortions in space itself. And when they passed, through the last veil of light, the view ahead made everyone on the bridge fall silent, for there, in orbit around a broken, dead world, was a graveyard of ships, hundreds of them, floating slowly in the dark, some shaped like nothing humans had ever seen, some long and sharp like spears, others curved and elegant like leaves of metal, and all of them bore the same strange markings as the signal from the core, as if this place had once been home to a great and powerful race, now gone or forgotten. And in the center of that field floated a massive black structure larger than a moon, pulsing faintly. And Vega said it was not a station or a ship, but something in between, a living construct, still active, still listening. And the moment they approached, the core inside Horizon's Edge responded on its own, unlocking files no one had ever seen before, images and voices from a forgotten past. And the truth came pouring out like light from a cracked wall, showing that long ago, this place had been the center of an alliance of ancient species, guardians of knowledge and peace, until a war had shattered everything. And one of their most advanced creations, a living core meant to restore balance, had been lost in the chaos, drifting across the stars until it was found years later by humans who did not know what it was, and used it to build the prototype battleship, never realizing they had taken something sacred. And now that piece had come home, and the alien fleet was not here to fight, but to protect the return of what had been lost. And as the ship came to a stop near the black structure, the core detached itself from its housing, floating free in a bubble of energy, and moved slowly across space toward the construct, where it merged with the black surface and disappeared. And for a long time nothing happened. But then the dead ships around them began to glow softly, one by one, as if waking from a long sleep. And the black structure came to life, opening like a flower of metal and light, releasing a wave of energy that passed through Horizon's Edge and all the ships nearby, not destroying, but healing, repairing old wounds, restoring power. And inside the ship, Vega said she could feel the difference, that the systems were clearer, faster, more alive. And then a voice echoed across all frequencies, deep and ancient, thanking the humans for returning what was taken, and offering them a gift in return. Not weapons, but understanding, knowledge of the stars, safe passages through space, cures for old sicknesses, and a warning that the universe was far older and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And what had been sleeping here was only one part of something larger. And the gift they had returned would now help protect all life again, but only if used with care. And Captain Lane stood in awe, realizing that Horizon's Edge, the ship she had thought was just a weapon, had become something more. A bridge, Between species, a key to forgotten truths, and a symbol that even in a galaxy full of fear, trust could still exist. And as the alien fleet slowly moved away, vanishing one by one into the stars, the black structure closed once more, silent and still, and the crew turned their ship home, not with fire behind them, but with light, carrying a message to Earth and beyond, that the galaxy was waiting, watching, and listening, and that humanity's first step had already changed everything.